We have a really unusual weather pattern taking shape across the United States as we begin the month of August. We have severe storms across the plains and we have heavy rains across the southeast. Let's dive right into the details next at the Weather Farm. As we begin the month of August, check out this upper level pattern. We have northwesterly winds for the eastern half of the United States, bringing cooler than normal air out across the Four Corners region. We have that high pressure continue to be anchored there. We do see troughs that are coming onshore into the Pacific Northwest. That's going to provide mechanism by the time we start next week for shortwave troughs to eject out of the Rockies and bring scattered severe storms to the northern plains. We watch the heat start to return by the time we get to Wednesday and Thursday into the Central Plains and the Ohio Valley. In fact, if we look at the severe weather threat for our Friday, the Storm Prediction Center has gone ahead and highlighted parts of South Dakota, Nebraska, into northeastern Colorado, even far southeastern Wyoming, with a slight risk of severe weather. We have a marginal risk extending down through New Mexico all the way back up to Montana. The main threat with these storms on our Friday is going to be hail and the strong winds, where we could see isolated winds 50 to 60 miles per hour. We can't forget about the Carolinas, though, because the Storm Prediction Center also has you in the impact for high winds for your Friday. There's even a slight tornado risk across the Dakotas into northeastern Colorado. With any of these cells, if they do remain discrete, they could spin up because there's enough instability in the atmosphere and lift that we could spin up a tornado or two across this area for our Friday. So let's put our map into motion across parts of Colorado. As we get into Friday afternoon, we're watching storms start to develop. We're going to see scattered storms across New Mexico, and by the afternoon and evening, we see this line starting to form. Again, if these cells remain discrete, we could have strong hail, strong winds, an isolated tornado. And that's why the Storm Prediction Center has also increased the risk down towards New Mexico, because we can see a storm or two flare up Friday evening into Saturday morning. But watch, these storms will also impact Nebraska, western Kansas, and the Panhandle of Texas by the time we are waking up on our Saturday morning. And Saturday appears to be another carbon copy of our day on Friday, with generally the same areas highlighted for that slight risk of severe weather, stretching from Nebraska down through Kansas and Colorado. We shift it just slightly to the east. We do have an elevated risk of severe weather across parts of southern Georgia and Alabama. This is going to be primarily for the threat of heavy amounts of rain, not so much the severe weather, but we could see strong winds, heavy rainfall associated across the southeast. So if we look at the 500 millibar map, we see that this cool air from the northwest is spilling into the Ohio Valley. We see that with the wind barbs. Out across parts of Texas, though, we have those winds coming in from the south. That's what's creating the storms across parts of Colorado and Wyoming for our Friday. But as we go through our Sunday, we start to see these winds, especially across the Ohio and Tennessee Valley, start to turn a little bit more. And that's a sign that we're going to see a warming pattern as we get into our Monday and Tuesday. Southerly winds are going to be across the Central Plains into Iowa as we get to Tuesday afternoon and make their way eastward Wednesday into Thursday. If we look at our temperature anomaly map, we see that throughout this weekend, the eastern half of the United States is going to be below normal in temperature, while the Rockies and Southwest above normal, well above normal across the Canadian provinces. But as we get to Sunday, still below normal. So we're going to have temperatures 70s and 80s, even some isolated 60s in the far northeast. Down across the southeast, you're going to have added cloud cover with precipitation. That's what's really going to keep your temperatures down. But we see it by Monday into Tuesday. The warmth is beginning to spread up through the Dakotas, 10 to 15 degrees above normal. And so for our high temperatures on our Friday, it's going to be 90s, and the 100s are going to be pushed well south into Texas or out into the deserts of the southwest. We do see some warming across the mountains, where we see temperatures in the 80s and 90s. But across the Ohio and Tennessee valleys into the northeast, temperatures are really cool for this time of the year. The first day of August, we're seeing temperatures in the 60s and 70s. And it is a carbon copy for our Saturday, with those same areas being well below normal. And across the southeast into the Carolinas, your temperatures are being held down more for the cloud cover and heavy amounts of rainfall. 90s across Texas, across Kansas, 90s across the Canadian provinces, and well north. So we see that ridge really building across the west, spilling over into the Canadian provinces, while we have that trough here in the eastern half of the United States. Our Saturday morning lows, when you wake up tomorrow morning, we could see widespread 50s from Missouri into Maine, up through Minnesota. I wouldn't be surprised if some areas do dip down into the 40s for your overnight lows, but across the Gulf Coast, it's going to remain very hot and very humid. Lows not dropping below 75. And out in the desert, your overnight lows are going to be in the 90s for Phoenix. So let's take a look at our 850 millibar temperature map. This is a general idea of where the temperature trends are going. And again, as we get to the middle of the week, we see that warmth that was out west. It starts to ever so slowly start to move towards the east. So we believe that by next weekend, areas in the east, the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes, Tennessee Valley, where you're below normal this weekend, you're going to be much above normal by the time we get to next weekend, as we watch a more potent trough digging across the northwest into Montana and Wyoming for next weekend. would be the area where we could see the clash of thunderstorms, of cold air masses and warm air masses, setting up severe weather anywhere across the Central Plains. We can see that warming trend is going to get going on Tuesday as we start to see the return of 100s to as far north as South Dakota, and that continues into our Wednesday. Parts of Kansas, you're going to be 105, but let's not forget about the deserts. We have temperatures 110 to 115, temperatures approaching the century mark for places like Dallas, down through Louisiana and Arkansas, 80s and 90s, which are very common this time of the year across the deep south and down into Florida. The Northeast, you're warming back into the 70s and 80s. Again, not too bad for this time of the year. And the 8 to 14 day outlook from the Climate Prediction Center has the entire United States above normal in temperatures for the time period August 8th through August 14th. I don't remember the last time we saw the entirety of the contiguous 48 under this elevated probability for above normal temperatures, but it's definitely a sign that the pattern is changing here in the next few days. And in terms of our precipitation, the Ohio and Tennessee valleys down through the Gulf and Florida, you're going to see above normal precipitation, as well as the Pacific Northwest down into California, and even in the deserts of southwest Arizona, you have above normal precipitation during this time period. But through Utah, down through New Mexico, you're expected to see below normal precipitation over the next 8 to 14 days. And this really isn't good news, because those areas where we expect to see the below normal precipitation is the areas where we have severe and extreme drought, according to the latest drought monitor that was issued on our Thursday. We see the risk of exceptional drought really confined to southwestern New Mexico, and then we see extreme drought across parts of Idaho and Montana. We hope that the upcoming rainfall will help alleviate some of these conditions, but we're not looking in terms of a significant amount of rain over the next 7 to 10 days. Across the Central Plains, where you've seen heavy rain across parts of Nebraska, it was a heavy rain, 3 to 6 inches. It was very quick and it ran off very quickly. It wasn't the kind of rain that will soak into the ground. So you're still seeing conditions there of moderate drought. But east of the Mississippi, we really aren't seeing those drought conditions, which is surprising because we are entering the time of year where it tends to be very dry across this part of the country. So we'll continue to watch to see how this map develops over the next coming few days. In terms of our precipitation across the United States over the next 5 days, we're going to see storms across the Central Plains that could produce isolated amounts of 1 to 2 inches of rain. Same thing across parts of northern Montana. But we're really going to focus across the Southeast, where we're going to see heavy amounts of rain, where we're going to see rain showers Friday, Saturday, Sunday, even into Monday. And those storms, as they just sit and spin and train over the same areas, they could dump heavy amounts of rainfall. In fact, one estimate would show widespread 1 to 2 inches from the panhandle of Florida back through the Carolinas. As we start to get to these yellows, that's areas of 4 to 6 inches. And if we look off the coast of South Carolina, we start to see those browns. That's where we could see up to 6 to 8 of rain by the time we get to Tuesday afternoon. And next week, this is the 500 millibar vorticity map. So where we see these reds, that's area of spin. And so when we have this northwesterly flow and we see this trough in the west, this is where systems out of the Rockies tend to spin up small shortwave troughs into the Central Plains. And where we see that vorticity or that spin in the atmosphere, those are areas we're going to be watching for the potential of severe storms, especially across the Canadian provinces, as by the time we get to next weekend, the jet stream will lift a little farther north. But across parts of Nebraska, as we end that week, we have that clash of the cooler air and the warmer air, as we saw in our temperature anomaly maps. We're going to set up the Central Plains for the threat of severe weather as we get toward the end of next week. Jumping down to the tropics, we've not had a lot to talk about in this area. In fact, we don't expect any tropical development over the next 7 days down in the Atlantic. And we are now entering the month of August. The peak of hurricane season is September 10th. And so we would expect the activity would start to ramp up and ramp up fairly quickly in the coming days. In fact, if we look at our sea surface temperatures, we have waters that are very warm to support tropical development. Even as we get far and east of the Lesser Antilles, temperatures here are 85 degrees Fahrenheit. Very sustainable for tropical storm development. But the problem that we're seeing is as waves come off the coast of Africa, they look healthy as they emerge offshore, and we're seeing wave after wave. But the problem they're running into with these yellows and these reds, that's area of high wind. So where we see the blues, that's area of low wind. So as they come off the coast of Africa, and that's at the far edge of the map, they're running into these yellows and red areas. And so those storms, while they may appear healthy at the beginning and very organized, once they run into that wind shear, they basically get ripped apart and we lose the tropical development. So we're going to continue to watch, because if we can get this shear to lessen in this part of the globe, we're going to watch for the potential of development by the time we get to the 10th to the 15th of the month. So again, here's your summary for your Friday. We're going to see warmth across the South near 100 for parts of Texas. The Ohio Valley, 70s and 80s for your Friday. Much of the same on our Saturday. The warmth does spread up into Montana, into the Dakotas, where we're going to see widespread 80s and 90s. The deserts, your 110 plus for your Saturday. And in terms of rainfall over the next 5 days, that heaviest axis is going to be across the southeast, with most areas receiving 1 to 2 inches, but we could see isolated flooding from those areas that get up to 4 to 6 inches of rain. We thank you for joining us here at the Weather Farm. Stay weather aware, stay weather alert, especially if you're in the southeast. If you see heavy rainfall, you see flooding waters, turn around, don't drown, because just the smallest amount of water can move your car a significant distance. We hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you again on Monday.